So we're going to continue our look at the functions of the hardware, and we're going to focus mostly on the sensor section here, and a few of the secondary functions of the pads. Before I go into that, however, I just want to cover a couple of things again in this top section here with these LCD screens. Basically just so we don't run into any confusion as the series goes on. So if we go to our first selection up here in the top, we can select between master, group, and sound. And if you want to follow along with me in this video, I'll show you which kit I'm using right here. So I'm going to switch over to the sound selection right now. And when I'm in this mode, whenever I click on a pad, you'll see its name come up on the screen. Now that lets us know that the sound is in focus, which means I can make adjustments to it depending on the options available on the screen that I'm looking at. Now right now we're looking at the channel settings, but if we switch over to plugin, we'll have a whole new set of parameters to look at. Now the plugin that we're actually looking at is the sampler. This is what's holding the sample, and so we're going to see parameters that are relative to sample playback here, such as polyphony, or if I switch to the next page, we have tune, start, and sample reverse. And on the right, you can see the amplitude envelope. So with that said, we can come out of this mode now. I'm going to go back to the channel setting, and we can get started looking at these functions down the center here. So let's get started with our first function, which is mute, down here at the bottom. Now this allows us to take a sound out of the audio path. So if we just press play, we can actually do this on the fly. I'm going to hold down mute, and when we hit a pad, you'll see it goes dim as it comes out of the audio path. And if you want to bring it back in, we can just hit that pad again, and we'll be able to hear it again. Now I can pin this screen by hitting this function button up here. Now I don't have to hold down mute the whole time to operate the mute functions. Now on the right screen, there are two buttons up here, all on and none. And if we push none, all the sounds will become muted. And the neat thing here is you can actually start to build your pattern again by bringing the sounds back in one by one. Now if we push the all on button, that will bring them all back in simultaneously. Okay, so if we take a look at the left screen here, you'll see that we have all the kits highlighted. That's because we can actually mute an entire kit in one button press. So I'm still in mute mode, and I'm going to hit the group button. And notice how the entire group is muted instantly. And the same applies, of course, to the other kits as well. Of course, there's nothing on those right now, so you won't hear anything anyway. So the mute function can be a pretty powerful performance tool. So I'm going to unpin the mute screen now, and let's go into our next function, which is solo. And in contrast to muting, solo isolates the sound, muting everything else but that sound. So here, for example, we're now just listening to the shaker, and everything else has been muted. And just like last time when we're looking at the mute functions, in the top right screen here, we have options to select none or all. Now there is a behavior of solo mode that I want to make you aware of going forward here, and it has to do with how it affects the mutes. So the easiest way is to just show you. I'm going to go into mute mode, and I'm going to mute, say, the kick and the shaker. So there's the playback, no kick, no shaker. So I'm going to go back into solo mode now, and let's just say solo the hi-hat here. And now watch what happens when I come out of solo mode. So I'll take the hi-hat out of solo, and notice the kick and the shaker have come back in. And so that right there is just the behavior I want to make you aware of. If you mute some sounds and then you solo a sound, once you come out of that solo, those mutes will be undone. Okay, so let's move on now to our next function. Now, just to show you how this works, let's imagine we're playing our set live here, and you want to make some adjustments to your sound on the fly. Let's say now you want to select another sound. The problem is, every time you make a selection, it actually triggers that sound as well. So while you're playing live, if you want to switch your selection, you're also going to be triggering your sound, and of course that might interfere with your live set. So what we need here is a way to select the sound without it actually being triggered, and that's exactly what we have in the select function. Notice that the layout is the same as in the mute and solo screens. So I'm just going to pin this now so I don't have to hold it down. And I can go ahead and make my selection, choose a sound that I want to make an adjustment to, and then come out of select mode, and then we can start making our changes. Say adjust the level, for example. And notice how we never triggered the sound the whole time we were making our selections. Now the other really cool thing you can do here is go to multi-mode, and this allows you to select multiple pads at the same time. So for example, I could add to the shaker the hi-hat and the kick, and now I've got all three of those selected. So when I come out of the select mode here, and I go to a parameter, that parameter will now affect all three of those pads. Now the cool thing about this particular kit is because all the sounds that are loaded in are samples, they're all loaded into the sampler, and therefore they all share the same sampler parameters, such as reverse. So I can now just switch on reverse for those 3 pads, or adjust the tuning. So that's pretty cool for live playing as well. Now on the next page, the sampler also has a filter, so I'm going to switch that on right now, just to show you another typical use of selecting multiple samples for manipulation. Okay, so I'm going to come out of this mode now, and just turn this filter off here. And I just want to go back to normal operation, so I'm going to hit none. Now we just have 1 pad selected at a time, as per usual. Okay, so the next thing I want to show you here is events. You can see it just above select there. It's a secondary function, so we access it by holding down Shift and pressing select. Now it's kind of awkward to hold all that down, so what you can do instead is just go up to events up here, and that's kind of an easier way, in my opinion, to access this mode. Now what this mode is doing is just highlighting the pads that have events associated with them. And what it allows us to do is select those events just by hitting the pad. So now I've hit the shaker pad, and all the events on the shaker pad are now selected, which means I can now manipulate them directly from the hardware. For example, right above these 2 pads here are the nudge functions. So if I hold down Shift, I can actually nudge the events forwards and backwards, which just means to move them around slightly. So it's an easy way to play around with the groove and feel of a track, just by shifting events forwards and backwards slightly. Now the shaker in particular, because it has a soft attack, it has a bit of a fade in, so just laying it down straight to grid doesn't really line it up very well. So what I'm going to do here is just nudge it until where I can hear the actual transient in the shaker lines up with the kick. So it gives you real nice control over the groove and feel of a pattern. Now speaking of control, we actually have control over the resolution of the nudge settings as well. So if we go into our grid mode, you'll see the nudge resolution up here on the encoder. And what it's doing is showing us that it's 1/8 of the step resolution. So you can see the actual nudge value depends on the step value as well. Now if we move it all the way to the right, we will get finer resolution, and we can go all the way down to 1/16. And if we move it to the left, we can go all the way up to the value of a full step. Okay, so to bring this all together now, what I'm going to do is record some claps here. I'm going to use the count in, so I'm going to hit Shift, record. Okay, so some of those claps are a little quieter than the others, but it's no big deal for now. So I'm going to push select. And remember that events mode is selected. And I'm going to highlight my clap. And I'm just going to deselect the shakers because I don't want to change those at all. I'm going to come out of select mode now. And I can now use the nudge functions just to make those claps fit in nicely to the groove. Okay, so I think we'll take a little break now. We've covered quite a few things. We'll come back in the next video and we'll continue to look at the rest of the features in Maschine. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.